This is the conclusion to Anthropology 203, Language and Human Being. If you think back to the beginning of the course, right, I had said that we had really set out to explore how language provides insight into human being. We sort of had two primary goals. On the one hand, to develop a better appreciation of the cultural role of language in human life as a worldview, as a set of social relationships, as a set of identities. We also had this goal of recognizing key concepts in what probably was a new academic discipline to you, that of linguistic anthropology. But for a discipline that studies language, what concepts are being used? And concepts such as worldview, social organization, and identity were also discussed in the context of the class as well. Beyond those two goals, though, this class has really also been exploring ideas about method and analysis. Anthropologists explore the biology of language, they explore aspects of the universal human linguistic capacity, the sound systems, the grammars, and semantics and other parts of language, and they use natural and social science methods to do so. But as you saw from this course and these general education goals that we also use methods and forms of analysis from the arts and humanities. And in terms of the general education, we've been having two important goals as well. We've been trying to understand and analyze humanistic methods of inquiry. And so we looked at something like ethnography and anthropology. We also looked at interpretive reasoning as well, primarily the way anthropologists use interpretive reasoning in making sense of the kinds of information they use when researching language. On the other hand, we've also tried to improve our communication skills. So, not just the kind of understanding the methods, right, of inquiry, but also how we uh, put together our findings and communicate with audiences, with readers, and so on. And we've tried to do that with attention to the writing process in this course. And what were our findings, right? What are some of the conclusions maybe that at this point we might stop and reflect back on? And I think the key point here, right, that we've seen through the course and through the case studies is the use of each particular language in the world, each particular language variety, reflects sort of distinct human cultural populations and their learned ways of thinking and behaving rather than their biology, right, or their nature. It reflects the way that people think and act differently across populations. I think it really reflects the different ways that people make sense of their own experiences. Think about this in the context of the case studies that we saw this quarter. We explored African American language varieties, African American folklore, and we looked at its relationship to something like an African American worldview. And when we looked at this, we looked at an early text in linguistic anthropology, one that we can think of as sort of first generation text in our field, and one that was very impressionistic, that in fact, determining what that worldview was not something that the author set out to achieve and set out to articulate within the course of that text. They left it as an open question. They explored folklore with the understanding that there was a worldview, but they didn't try to kind of provide a determinative argument for what that worldview was. And the text itself read something like a fictional novel. We also, though, looked at other case studies. We looked at Apache language use and how Apache place names and the stories that go with those place names reflect Apache social relationships and what they see as good social relationships in their community. And this text was a very experiential text. It was interpretive. It was also very theoretical, right? In trying to understand what humans do when they name places. It went, beyond the confines really of what we were doing inside the class, and it was getting into more sort of interpretations and the development of theories, right, of language use. This particular text was more academic and referred to existing theories and philosophies and so on. And then our final and third case study was ways of speaking and the use of Jewish language and religious identity among Jews here in the United States. And we had an academic text whose style really does, in many ways, reflect the author's own Jewish identity. So over the course of 10 weeks, we actually made a lot of ground cover here. We pursued three very different case studies of different languages and language varieties, and the way that these texts communicate, right, about language and culture to the audience was really quite different as well. If we're going to conclude now, though, so what's the point here? What do we hope maybe 10 years from now that we have from a class like this? Well, I hope that the study of language that you've had in the class does uh, shape, your sense of how complex and diverse human experience is. I hope that when you kind of go beyond this particular class and you reflect in your own terms on other languages and language varieties, that you're also not kind of maybe trapped by ideas about something being a good language or language variety or a bad language or language variety, but that you begin to think beyond that, right? That, well, all humans interpret their experiences, they interact with other people, and they construct their identities through their language use. There's so much more to understand about human beings through reflection on language rather than just whether a person is using language in what we might say in a subjective sense, in a good way or in a bad way. Really a limiting way to think about the significance of language for human beings. And I think finally that this kind of study, starting points here and then taking this, yourselves into your own worlds, really allows us to be more sensitive and open to those who speak or write in language varieties different from our own. We can be more responsive, we can be more aware and alive to the value of other languages. We can become more critical, maybe, of our dependence on our own language, on our own worldview, on our own social relationships and identities, and so on. And sort of be aware of the different ways and the socially significant ways that we can be human. I think this is one of the ultimate goals of a class like this, and I hope it's one that you carry with you beyond this conclusion into the rest of your lives.